Okay, my wonderful students, we are in our textbook. We are in our textbook on page 146. In our textbook, page 146, and the top of the page on 147. So we are in our textbook. We are in our textbook, page 146. So let's listen to the story.
Page 146. The Wilsons' Party. Listen.
It's up here.
Mr. and Mrs. Wilson invited all their friends and neighbors to a party last night. They stayed home all day yesterday and prepared for the party. In the morning, the Wilsons worked outside. Their daughter Margaret cleaned the yard. Their son Bob painted the fence. Mrs. Wilson planted flowers in the garden, and Mr. Wilson fixed their broken front steps. In the afternoon, the Wilsons worked inside the house. Margaret washed the floors and vacuumed the living room carpet. Bob dusted the furniture and cleaned the basement. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson stayed in the kitchen all afternoon. He cooked spaghetti for dinner, and she baked apple pies for dessert. The Wilsons finished all their work at 6 o'clock. Their house looked beautiful, inside and out. The Wilsons' guests arrived at about 7:30. After they arrived, they all sat in the living room. They ate cheese and crackers, drank lemonade, and talked. Some people talked about their children. Other people talked about the weather. And everybody talked about how beautiful the Wilsons' house looked, inside and out. The Wilsons served dinner in the dining room at 9 o'clock. Everybody enjoyed the meal very much. They liked Mr. Wilson's spaghetti, and they loved Mrs. Wilson's apple pie. In fact, everybody asked for seconds. After dinner, everybody sat in the living room again. First, Bob Wilson played the piano, and his sister Margaret sang. Then, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson showed a video of their trip to Hawaii. After that, they turned on the music, and everybody danced. As you can see, the Wilsons' guests enjoyed the party very much. In fact, nobody wanted to go home.
So now let's do the reading checkup on page 147. So on page 147, we have some questions. We have questions about the story. We have questions about the story, and we need to write the answer. Okay? So the first question is, what did Margaret and Bob Wilson do in the morning? Now, Margaret and Bob are the children. So what did they do in the morning? Margaret cleaned. So this is all in the past tense. Margaret cleaned the yard. Bob painted the fence. Number 2, how did, remember, did is past tense. How did Mr. and Mrs. Wilson prepare for the party in the afternoon? So in the afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson stayed in the kitchen. So they were working in the kitchen, right? So they worked in the kitchen. They cooked spaghetti and baked apple pies. that they stayed in the kitchen. Number 3. When did the guests arrive? When did the guests arrive? The guests arrived at 7:30. The guests arrived at 7:30. Number 4, where, so question word where for location, correct? Where for location. Where did the guests sit when they arrived? They all sat, so sit, past tense is sat. They all sat in the living room. They all sat in the living room. Number 5, what did they eat before dinner? What did they eat before dinner? They ate cheese and crackers. They ate cheese and crackers. Number 6, what did Margaret do after dinner? What did Margaret do after dinner? She, or Margaret sang. Margaret sang. Number 7, what did Mr. and Mrs. Wilson do after dinner? Mr. and Mrs. Wilson showed a video of their trip to Hawaii. Very nice practice. Good reading.